NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that a record 23 out of NATO's 32 member states have met the alliance's defense spending target of 2% of GDP this year, which marks a significant increase in defense investments across the alliance, driven by heightened security concerns and geopolitical tensions.
To tell us more about this significant event is Mr. Benjamin Tallis, Senior Research Fellow, German Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Pleasure to be back with you.
So as we mentioned, 23 out of 32 countries have now met the 2% GDP spending, with Poland taking the lead at over 4%. Can you tell us first about the significance of this number and what we can expect going forward?
Well, it's significant in two ways. One is that we need the capabilities, and spending the money is what's going to get us the capabilities that we need. So it's good to see the increase in defense spending. And secondly, it's good politically because it shows that allied states are responding to the political pressure that has been put on them by states like Poland that have taken the lead in responding to Russia's aggression by building up their defenses through massive investment. And they're responding also to the call from the US for real burden shifting rather than burden sharing. We're not all the way there yet. And it's clear that it's more important what you get for the money than how much you spend, because accounting fixes and pension payments don't deter anyone. So the next challenge is really to make sure that we're really getting the bang for our buck here.
And I wonder, you mentioned challenges, and I want to deepen that subject because I feel like the European Union has to now balance its defense spending with the broader security needs, such as now border protection and migration management. So how do we navigate this?
Well, the cost of border protection is a lot less than the cost of serious defense investment. We're not talking anything like the same amount, so it's possible to do both. And this is the situation we find ourselves in, assailed by different kinds of threats from around the world and close to home at our borders, as you mentioned. We have to deal with them all. These are not either or things. But in terms of prioritizing government investment, then defense has to be number one, because without that kind of national security, the rest of it becomes irrelevant. It becomes a moot point. But it really does come to a choice that has to be made at some stage about what to do when. So, for example, we can't choose not to manage our green transition, not to handle climate change. But right now, we have to focus on national security and on defense in order that then we continue to have the democratic governments that will actually be able to handle climate change. Because I'm sure you and your viewers would agree that Vladimir Putin doesn't really seem to care that much about climate change. So we need to maintain our regimes that can do that. And the way to do that is spending on defense.
All right, going back to what you just mentioned earlier, how and what the spending on capability is going to be a key element going forward. And to quote our previous guest, Mr. Gary Tabash, the former chief of the NATO staff, NATO military liaison mission in Moscow, saying that, well, it is a very good message that NATO is pumping out these type of number, but it is also very important on what and how it's actually being spent on. Can you help us expand a little bit on that, and what are the more important needs that these 2% of GDP to even 4% of GDP should be going to?
Yes, and it's good that you point out that Poland is actually spending 4% of GDP, and all of the alliance countries should recognize that 2% is the floor, not the ceiling here. And what I think we can expect to see in the coming years is that floor being raised in order to actually get the investment that we need in our capabilities. And it's those capabilities that are actually key. So there is also part of this target that says that 20% of that spending should go on equipment, basically. So it shouldn't go on paying pensions for old soldiers, etc. That 20% has to go on equipment. Why is that? Because we need that expensive equipment in order to actually increase our combat power. And that's things on like spending on tanks, on helicopters, on jets, and on missiles that will actually help us to really improve our ability to deter the Russian threat by showing that we would have the capability to defeat them. Now, this is a question for many allies as to what they're spending on, and what we can expect to see at the NATO summit in Washington is perhaps a clearer statement from all allies that it's expected that they will commit more to actually this kind of equipment. The other big thing that we need is enablers, as they're called. Those are the things that allow you to fight. So intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, electronic warfare, early warning in the air, the surveillance aircraft that we sometimes see, as well as logistics, the things that actually get us to where we need to go to fight, and military mobility, which allows troops to transport across Europe. So the kind of reinforcements that would be needed should something happen on the eastern flank, so that Poland, for example, wouldn't have to fight alone. All of that costs a lot of money, but it's those kind of things that we really have to be spending on if we want a credible European pillar of NATO.
And of course, we do see now, seeing the numbers, that not all countries see eye to eye when it comes to the percentage of defense spending, because not all countries are meeting the 2% of GDP as such. Now, my question is, which brings me to, how do varying levels of the defense spending among the EU member states affect now the overall security and cohesion within the Union?
It's a great question because there's a lot of eyes on Madrid at the moment. Bottom of the league table, 1.28% of spending. And that's a large European country with a large economy. So getting another 0.7% of their GDP on board would make a big difference. So I think Pedro Sanchez and his government can expect a lot of pressure, and rightly so, from the allies who are leading the way, including Poland, the Baltic states, and the Nordics, who are really putting their money where their mouth is, but also Canada. Consistent underspender, 1.37% of GDP this year, 1.29% last year, and not really with the capabilities it needs. So what I think we can expect is a return to the kind of Cold War NATO politics, where there is a real internal peer pressure and a willingness to tell other countries what they need to do. We've rather backed off from that in recent years, but I think the geopolitical situation now demands it, and there should be nowhere for those free riders to hide.
You're talking about Washington earlier. Maybe that's when a more clear statement would be made. And going back to that, I was wondering whether or not, like this number we're seeing right now, 23 out of 32 country, is also a statement made before going into Washington that the European countries are ready to provide and present a unified voice when it comes to gearing up the NATO alliance.
Well, precisely for the reasons that were just mentioned, it's not quite unified yet, and it's also not unified around a high enough number. I mean, NATO prioritizes unity. We've heard messages of unity as the absolute key to the Washington summit, but if it's unity around a lowest common denominator, that's not suitable to meet the geopolitical moment that we're actually in. So while I think this is political to release this statement in advance and show that Europeans are starting to step up, it really does shine the light on those who aren't. Now, what the Americans are going to expect, and this will hold true continuing whether Joe Biden gets reelected or whether Donald Trump is elected, is this real notion of burden shifting, that the Europeans genuinely stand up to provide for their own security. And that will mean providing the bulk of the conventional capability that Europe needs. US would still provide its extended deterrence, its nuclear security guarantee that underpins the whole alliance, but they want to see Europeans stepping up. And this is a step on the way, but let's be clear, the road is a lot longer yet.
Indeed. Benjamin Tallis, thank you so much for joining us and providing your insights on the matter.
Great to be with you. Thanks.